My daughter-in-law called me a useless leech right in front of my son, the maid, and our neighbors. Get a job and stop sucking Darren dry. I just smiled and said, sweetheart, I hope you've updated your R-sum. Stay with me till the very end and let me know where you're watching from so I can see how far the truth really spreads. My name is Eileen Ford. I'm 68 years old. And last week, my daughter-in-law called me a leech in my own house. Not behind my back. Not in anger. But right there in the middle of dinner with her wine glass in hand and my son sitting silently across the table. You're just a leech. Get a job and stop sucking Darren dry. Her voice was cold casual, like she'd been rehearsing it for weeks. I sat there, frozen fork halfway to my mouth. My hands didn't shake, but something inside me cracked. Not because of what she said, but because Darren didn't say a damn thing. He just looked down. It was quiet. Unnaturally quiet. The kind of silence that makes your heartbeat sound like thunder. The housekeeper froze near the kitchen doorway. I could feel her eyes, the awkward tension. But I didn't react. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just turned my head slowly, looked Thalia in the eye, and I smiled. Sweetheart, I hope you've updated your resume. She blinked, just once, then laughed it off loud and forced. But I saw her hand tremble slightly as she picked up her fork again. Darren looked at me, a flicker of something in his eyes, fear maybe, or guilt. I took a sip of wine. My lasagna had gone cold, but I didn't care. That wasn't a dinner. That was a declaration of war. She had no idea she'd just stepped into a game I'd been playing long before she was even born. And the most dangerous kind of woman, the one who smiles while planning your downfall. That night, I didn't sleep. I laid in bed replaying every second. Her face, his silence, the chill in my chest. And then I made a promise. They thought I was weak, a burden, someone to manage to tolerate. What they didn't know was that I had built empires, buried a husband, and buried my pride long enough. What would you do if your own family called you a burden? Before I was the quiet old woman in the guest room, I was the woman who built a company from scratch with my husband. His name was Michael. We started with a folding table and 2 laptops in a garage that barely fit our car. We worked 16-hour days, skipped vacations, risked everything. And when the first million came in, we cried like kids. By the time we were in our late 40s, our name was known. Our company specialized in logistics automation. Boring to most people. But to us, it was everything. Michael handled the engineering. I ran the people, the systems, the chaos. We made a good team. And when we sold the company, it wasn't just for money. It was for freedom. But freedom didn't last long. Cancer took Michael in less than a year. It was brutal. He was my partner in business, in life, in everything. After the funeral, I sat in our oversized empty house and realized something awful. No one had ever loved me without first seeing my success. Not the neighbors. Not my so-called friends. They loved the title, the power, the money. So I disappeared. I sold the house, cashed out most of the assets, kept a quiet penthouse no one knew about. Then I found a modest apartment in a quiet suburb and started wearing old cardigans and walking with a limp that wasn't even real. I let my hair gray out. I smiled less. I played poor, weak, irrelevant. I needed to know who would still hold me close when they thought I had nothing. Some people drifted away without a word. Some stayed close out of habit or obligation. And then there was Darren. My son. I wanted to believe he stayed because of love. But as the years passed, the silence grew and the distance between us became a canyon neither of us tried to cross. I was no longer the woman on magazine covers or conference stages. I was just mom. Or worse, that old woman taking up space in his wife's house. But I watched. I remembered, and I waited. We were only supposed to grab a few things. Thalia had a dinner party coming up, and she wanted fresh flowers, cheese, wine. Darren offered to drive. I hadn't planned on going, but when he asked if I wanted to tag along, I said yes. A small part of me still wanted to feel included. At first, it was fine. I pushed the cart slowly, letting them walk ahead. I didn't mind. I'd learned how to fade into the background. I stood quietly while Thalia debated brands of goat cheese. Darren checked his phone uninterested. Then I made the mistake of speaking. I reached for a box of crackers. Just one small suggestion. I said they paired well with the wine she chose. That's when it happened. This isn't a nursing home. Wait by the carts. Her voice wasn't a whisper. It was sharp, loud, and intentional. A woman near the cereal aisle turned and stared. A teenage boy with earbuds paused. Even the cashier 3 lanes over glanced up. I felt my face burn. Not with anger, with shame. I looked at Darren, begging silently for a reaction, for him to say something, anything. But all he did was shift his weight and say, "Mom, just wait by the entrance. We'll be quick." My throat tightened. My hands clung to the cart like it was the only thing keeping me upright. I backed away slowly. No one touched me. No one stopped me. I walked to the front of the store and stood near the automatic doors, watching people come in and out, smiling at each other, living their ordinary lives. And I stood there, like a ghost. People passed me. Some glanced over, then quickly looked away. I wasn't part of their world. I was just some old woman waiting alone in a store she didn't belong to. I used to command boardrooms. I used to negotiate deals worth more than this entire shopping center. But in that moment, I was invisible, disposable. And what hurt most wasn't what Thalia said. It was how easily Darren let it happen. That was the moment it clicked. I wasn't his mother anymore. I was just a piece of furniture his wife didn't like. I remember the sound of the fork against the plate more than anything else. Not the food, not the laughter that never came. Just that small metallic clink when Thalia set her fork down and leaned toward me with a smile that wasn't a smile. She said I seemed restless lately. Maybe I was bored, she offered. Maybe I needed purpose. Then she tilted her head and asked if I'd considered applying for a part-time job at Walmart. Said it would give me something to do, something to live for. She said it like she was helping me, like I should thank her. I looked down at the roasted chicken she overcooked, then at Darren, who didn't look up. He kept cutting his meat like nothing happened. The knife moved too fast for someone that calm. My mouth felt dry, but I swallowed anyway. And I said, "Thank you for your suggestion. I'll consider it deeply." That was it. She blinked. Darren didn't react. The room held still. Even the air felt like it didn't want to move. I could hear the fridge humming in the background and the faint drip of the sink. No one said another word for a long time. After dinner, Thalia poured herself wine and scrolled her phone. Darren went back to work in the office like he always did. I washed the dishes quietly. Same way I'd done every night for months. But that night, I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I didn't even flinch. I just dried my hands, went to my room, and opened a drawer I hadn't touched in 3 years. Inside was a file with names, dates, passwords, keys. My real life. The one they didn't know about. And I smiled. The walls of my apartment were thin. Paint chipped off the corners. The heater rattled in winter and coughed dust in summer. Anyone who stepped inside would think I barely had enough to make rent. That was the point. It was a stage. A set. A carefully crafted illusion. Every morning I left through the side door with my worn canvas bag. I walked 2 blocks, then took a town car waiting just past the bakery. Inside, my driver would nod and take me to the city. To my real life. I lived on the top floor of a penthouse overlooking the skyline. White marble counters. Fresh orchids delivered every Friday. A kitchen I never used and a walk-in closet that could swallow this entire apartment whole. My BMW was parked underground spotless. My investment portfolio grew quietly every quarter. I had 3 advisors, 2 offshore accounts, and more liquid assets than Darren would ever touch in his lifetime. But no one knew. For 3 years, I kept it hidden. I let myself be seen as frail, broke, unnecessary. I ate bland dinners in that sad little apartment. I used a flip phone. I wore cardigans that didn't match. I let them believe what they wanted to believe. Because I needed to be sure. After Michael died, something inside me shifted. I had built a world with him, and suddenly I was standing in it alone. Surrounded by people who claimed to care but watched my every move like vultures circling. So I created distance. I let them see only what I allowed. I controlled the narrative. I controlled the access. And every time Thalia looked down on me, every time Darren turned away, I wrote it down. I remembered. They failed the test. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't even surprised. But it still hurt. And when it was time, I opened that drawer. I reconnected with my lawyer. I checked the documents, the ownership deeds, the surveillance footage. Everything was there. Everything I needed. Because before I showed them who I really was, I had to know one thing for certain. I needed to know who loved me for me. I chose a quiet afternoon. Darren wasn't home. Just Thalia sitting at the kitchen island scrolling on her phone with a glass of wine, like every other day. I stood across from her and said it calmly. I'm not poor. She didn't even blink. For a moment, she stared at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. Then she laughed. Not a chuckle. A full, cruel, echoing laugh that bounced off the marble countertops. She called me delusional. Said maybe we should schedule an evaluation. Asked what meds I forgot to take. Then she leaned closer and whispered like she was doing me a favor. That it was okay to lose touch with reality at my age. I didn't say a word. Not because I was afraid. Not because I doubted myself. I stayed silent because nothing I said would matter to her. She had made up her mind about who I was, and no truth could shake it. But I looked at her. Really looked. Past the makeup, past the wine-stained teeth, past the fake smile she used on her friends. And I felt nothing. Not anger. Not hurt. Just a slow, cold stillness. Because in that moment, I saw who she really was. And I knew what I had to do next. I waited until he came home. The door clicked shut. He set down his briefcase like every other night. Routine. Predictable. I asked him one question. When did you find out? He didn't act surprised. He didn't pretend not to know what I meant. He looked down for a second, then said 6 months ago. He had found an old banking email. Something I forgot to delete. He ran the numbers. Put it together. I asked why he never said anything. Why he let her talk to me like that. He said he needed to see who she really was. That sometimes people reveal themselves when they think no one is watching. He said it like it made him noble. But I didn't feel proud. Or relieved. I felt exposed. Like every cruel thing Thalia said, every silence from him had been some kind of twisted test. I looked at my son. And I didn't see a man torn between 2 loyalties. I saw a boy hiding behind detachment, using silence as a shield. Watching me drown while he studied the ripples. And in that moment, something in me shut off. Not because I hated him, but because I realized I had waited too long for a kind of love he didn't know how to give. I asked them both to sit. Thalia rolled her eyes. Darren looked tired. Neither of them noticed the folder in my hands. Just a plain manila file. No labels. No warning. I placed it gently on the table and slid it toward my son. Open it. He hesitated, then reached forward and pulled the flap. On top was a printed email. Subject line guardianship inquiry. Sent by Thalia. Addressed to a law firm downtown. She asked how to begin the process of declaring her mother-in-law mentally incompetent. Said she had concerns about my judgment about my finances. Said it was urgent. Beneath that were notes. Her handwriting. Ideas for how to convince Darren I was losing touch. Highlighted lines. Reminders to exaggerate small moments. Instructions to plant confusion. There were text messages, too. Screenshots. Her bragging to a friend about how close she was to getting full control. How she couldn't wait to sell the apartment. How she had already called decorators. Darren's face went pale. He kept turning pages. Then he stopped. The final sheet was a video still. A photo I had printed from our security camera. It showed Thalia in my penthouse alone. Her hands rifling through my drawers. I watched his eyes. They didn't widen. They didn't fill with rage. They just sank, like something inside him cracked and caved inward. He looked up at me, then back down. Said nothing. Thalia reached for the folder. I stopped her. No, you've seen enough. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. For once, she had nothing ready. No spin. No fake charm. Just silence. I stood up, looked down at the two of them. One broken. One exposed. I said calmly that everything had been documented, that I had legal copies in 3 locations, that the lawyer who'd helped me build my first company now managed all my estate affairs, and that this right here was only step 1. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. Because the truth printed in ink and sealed in that folder had already spoken louder than anything I could ever say. I didn't knock. I walked straight in. The echo of my heels on the polished hardwood made Thalia spin around. She was in yoga pants, hair in a towel. Barefoot and startled, Darren came out from the kitchen confused. Until he saw what I was holding. The deed. I was in full view now. Hair done. Black blazer. Leather gloves in hand. No cardigans. No secondhand shoes. I stood there like I belonged. Because I did. Thalia tried to speak. I held up one finger. Just one. I told her this house was mine. Bought with my money. Signed in my name. She had been living in it like a queen, treating me like a beggar. That ends now. She laughed, but it cracked halfway. Then I said it. Loud. Steady. This house is mine. You're leaving. Tonight. She looked at Darren, begged him with her eyes. But he didn't move. Instead, he turned, looked her right in the face, and said it flat. Get out. Thalia froze, as if she didn't recognize the man she married. Her mouth opened again, but Darren stepped back, let the words settle. I walked past her, down the hallway I built, into the room she once told me was too dusty. I opened the closet. My closet. Everything was still there. I turned around and faced them both. Calm. Final. Your things will be boxed. By the end of today. Thalia whispered something I didn't catch. But I wasn't listening anymore. This wasn't her story now. It was mine again. I got the call in the morning. It was the local precinct. The officer on the line was polite, but the message was clear. Thalia had filed a report. accused me of elder abuse, claimed I'd become violent, unstable, threatened her safety. I didn't flinch. I thanked the officer, got dressed, and walked into the station with a leather folder tucked neatly under my arm. They brought me into a small room. A detective sat across from me. He looked tired, kind but cautious. He asked if I knew why I was there. I nodded, said I did, then placed the folder on the table and opened it slowly. Inside were documents, medical reports from my last full physical, clean bill of health, statements from my financial advisor proving full cognitive capacity, a notarized letter from my attorney explaining the legal ownership of all assets, and finally transcripts of Thalia's text messages, including one where she bragged about making me look unstable. The detective read in silence, turned each page carefully. Then he leaned back and folded his hands. He said they had received the complaint late last night, that Thalia had insisted I was a danger to myself and others, that she feared I would hurt someone. I didn't respond. I just pointed to the highlighted line in her message, the one where she said if she couldn't take the money, she'd bury my reputation instead. The room went quiet. He closed the folder, stared at it for a second, then looked at me. She just committed a crime, ma'am. They came for her on a Tuesday afternoon. No sirens. Just a black car, 2 plain officers, and a calm knock on the door. Thalia answered, still in silk, still clinging to whatever illusion she had left. They read the charge. Attempted fraud, false reporting, manipulation of elder care laws for personal gain. Her voice cracked before she could protest. They asked her to come quietly. She didn't. Darren stood frozen in the hallway, not moving, not speaking, just watching as his wife, the woman he once defended, was led away in handcuffs. I didn't say much. I waited until the door shut behind them, until the quiet settled in the room like dust after a storm. Then I turned to him, looked him in the eyes. Now we rebuild. He nodded slowly, like a man waking up from a long, bad dream. We sat in the garden, the one I used to prune every Sunday morning, the same bench where he once gave me a handmade card in 2nd grade. The air smelled like jasmine again. It used to comfort me. Now, it just made me wonder where time had gone. He didn't speak for a while, just stared at his hands like they might tell him what to say. Then he looked up. His eyes were red, but not from anger. I think it was shame. He said he should have protected me, that he saw the signs but turned away. That part of him believed I was strong enough to handle it, but the truth was he didn't want to face who Thalia had become. He didn't want to admit he'd been wrong. I listened. I didn't interrupt, because every word was one step closer to the son I remembered. He asked if we could start over, if it wasn't too late to be a better son. I told him yes, but with one condition: no more secrets, no more blindness. He nodded, and when I reached out my hand, he took it, like he used to when he was little and afraid of the dark. For the first time in a long time, it felt like we were 2 people, not sides, a mother and her son. He told me about her one evening, just as the sun was brushing the sky with gold. Her name was Rebecca, a school teacher, quiet, grounded, kind. He said she made him feel steady again, like he could breathe. I asked if she knew. About the money. About everything. He shook his head. Said no. Said he wanted to keep it that way. Because for the first time in years, he was falling for someone without fear. Without games. And he didn't want to lose that. I looked at him, this man who had once let silence speak for him, now choosing honesty, even in what he kept. I asked what she saw in him. He smiled, said she liked the way he reads out loud, the way he listens. And then I smiled too. because maybe that's all we ever want. Someone who listens, who sees the heart before the wallet. So I told him, if she sees that first, she already has my blessing. The city looked different from up here. Same skyline, same lights. But tonight, it felt like mine. For the first time in years, I wasn't looking through a window hoping to belong. I was home. 3 years. That's how long I wore that costume. Old cardigans, canned soup, the broken elevator no one ever fixed. I played my part well. The quiet widow with a past no one asked about. I let them underestimate me. I let them ignore me. I let them believe I had nothing left. But every moment of silence was a note in my symphony. Every insult a lesson in restraint. And every step away from who I was brought me closer to who I could become. Now I sip my tea on the balcony. I breathe in peace instead of pain. The wind doesn't cut through me anymore. It carries me. I'm not the weak widow anymore. I'm Eileen, and I took my life back. If you've ever loved someone who hurt, you know this. You're not weak for trusting. But you are powerful when you finally say no. Tell your story. It might be the map someone else is searching for,